What is up, everyone? Welcome to There Can Only Be One, the podcast that puts together the all-star best of playlist of your favorite bands and artists, and a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Hello to all of our listeners in Toronto, Ontario, and around the world. Normally on this show, we like to try and mix things up a little bit. We try to get a wide variety of genres on here. So when I say that we're stepping back in time, I mean back. Way back to a career that started almost 60 years ago. We're talking about the one and only Jim Croce. And here to go through this deep dive of a discography, Joseph Whalen's back on the show. Man, how you doing?
I'm good, Jason. I'm so happy to be here. And yeah, really sort of testing my abilities to, retain information from a time that I have no idea of at all. Just was not like, this is a band that was, or a guy rather, who started up when my 2 years after my dad was born. So, I mean, this is really sort of testing my abilities for retention of information. Obviously have no experience at all, was not around at all for any of his albums, which is different from the last two episodes I've done. So this is going to be interesting for me.
Yeah, I mean, I will be honest and say that the 5 albums that we are going to be talking about during this episode all were released even before I was born. So we're stepping back in time here. But I mean, this is a bit of a change of pace for you because the last couple times you were on the show, we were talking about Sloan and then we were talking about Paramore. So, you've leaned more into the rock originally. This is definitely not that. So why Jim Croce?
So here's an interesting little story to set this all up. So I had a job working in a restaurant, and Jim Croce has a song that played very frequently on that particular restaurant's brunch playlist. I heard that over and over and over again. And it is, I'm not going to say the name of the song. I'm not going to tip it off what it is because it is one of my favorites in his catalog. So I don't want to get into that just yet. But that opened the door to all of the other Jim Croce songs that I've now listened to quite frequently. I mean, back in January at the start of the year, I was listening to Jim Croce basically nonstop. And so this is a weird thing that I do, though, is that I am quite often intrigued by songs that I hear at work, which makes other people question my sanity. I used to work at a pharmacy company in Canada that it's that one. I'm not going to say the name of it, but it's the one you're thinking of, where, I would just listen to the songs that I would hear at work in my free time. And people hated that. They didn't understand why I enjoyed doing that. I just kind of did. And Jim Croce's kind of the same, where it's like a little bit of almost a little bit of like Stockholm syndrome, a little bit, where it's just like, why are you doing this to yourself? But Jim Croce, fantastic musician who unfortunately passed much too early.
See, aren't you glad you never had a job as an elevator attendant? Because then the music that you listen to would be stuck in your head, and it would all just be Muzak versions of today's greatest hits. And then we would have to rescue you from the elevator.
Yeah, I think I'd probably go insane very quickly.
All right, so here's what we're going to do, dear listeners. We are about to go through the 5 studio albums of Jim Croce. As always, we never do any compilations or live albums. Well, I don't say never, because occasionally we do make exceptions. But in this case, we're sticking with the 5 studio albums. Now, that being said, some of these albums have had reissues with extra songs added. So if one of those songs happens to be a pick, that's okay, because we are talking about only 5 albums. You can only imagine just how many albums there would have been had Croce not sadly passed away early in that plane crash.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you're talking about, and especially like this was an episode where, like before, as you've mentioned, I did the episode with Sloan and the episode with Paramore. And there's obviously a lot of focus there on the drumming, the bass line, the guitar licks, everything like that. This was one where like I was writing out lyrics in like just a big block, almost a paragraph of like, this is just like, he was a tremendous lyricist. So, I mean, like just a songwriter that, yeah, unfortunately taken. And also should mention his guitarist Maury Mulison. He was, I mean, so huge on basically everything after You Don't Mess Around with Jim, which was obviously then uh, we'll get into it. Obviously, Life and Times, and then I Got a Name. But Maury Mulinson was a huge partner of Jim Croce and a big part of the biggest songs that Jim Croce wrote. So the two of them, unfortunately, passing much too soon.
Absolutely. But we start with 1966 and the release of Facets. By the way, this album was also reissued on March 23rd, 2004, with more songs added to it that were recorded in 1969 as part of the Jim and Ingrid Croce recordings. Oddly enough, this album was recorded in just 3 hours, and Croce had then since sold out every pressing from that initial run. And the funny thing is, the way this album came about was that they took the $500 that I guess Ingrid's parents had given them as a wedding gift to put together this album, and thinking that no, he's going to realize that he can't make it as a songwriter, and this will be the end of this little, musician kind of. Lo and behold, every single copy sold, and then Jim Croce became the Jim Croce that we know. So it's one of those situations where it doesn't take much to make a good album if the songwriting is already there.
Mm-hmm. And what's the most wrong you've ever been?
Well, the thing is, really, is there ever any wrong in going after a dream and creating something?
Unbelievable. Yeah. Just a tremendous story. And then, like what happens afterwards, like just some of the best songs that I think have ever been written. I'm biased, but I'm just going to throw that out there right now.
All right. So as we were preparing for this episode, Joseph, sends me a message saying, so are we sticking with the original recordings or are we dealing with the deluxe issues? I'm like, you have to decide that one for yourself. So I know this is one of those ones that had a lot of extra songs added to it in the reissue. So I'm going to ask you first, did you stick with the original album recording or is your pick off of the reissue songs?
So I did stick with the original, but I will say I did love the sound of the songs that came on the reissue, which is an extension of, as you said, the recording that they did on Jim and Ingrid, which we'll get into. So really nice song, like Child of Midnight has some beautiful harmonies on it. Like Ingrid's voice is really nice, complements Jim so well. But I ended up going with Texas Rodeo, which has the opening banjo, which is really fun. The verses, it tells a really cool story. It starts with 6 o'clock, goes to 7, 8, 9 o'clock. And honestly, like this entire album, like I had never listened to this album. If I'm going to be completely honest about it. This is my first time listening to it. This was like a lot of coming from Newfoundland, you get the traditional folk Irish songs, Irish Newfoundland music. So I grew up listening to a lot of different, sort of songs in this vein. And Texas Rodeo reminded me a lot of a band back home called the Masterless Men, who do some versions of traditional Irish songs. And this one just kind of tickled my brain in the same way that those songs do. So I went with Texas Rodeo. The Blizzard was one where it was just like, that's the type of song that made me think of like my grandparents, probably makes people think of their parents, like a song that they would listen to. Just super sad as well. Like just those traditional type of folk songs that have this like story that they're telling. That's just so depressing. Like a guy and a horse dies like on the way, like 100 meters or 100 yards from where they were supposed to be. Like just a really depressing song. But overall, though, I mean, I enjoyed this album. Great harmonies on the stuff that was released on the reissue. But I ended up going with Texas Rodeo. Also interesting to mention that, Steel Rail Blues, Gordon Lightfoot tune that Jim Croce took and made his own. So I thought that was pretty interesting too. Cool little Canadian tie there. But I went with Texas Rodeo.
And that's the thing too, when you think about some of these earlier folk albums, it's not uncommon to see, covers. I mean, there of course is a cover from Buffy St. Marie on here called Until It's Time for Me to Go.
Yeah.
One of the songs that made my short list is actually the music is by Jim Croce, but the words are from a Rudyard Kipling poem, The Ballad of Gunga Din.
Mm,
So, it's fascinating to see where some of the inspiration and some of the source material kind of comes from. So I really was sitting down with two songs that kind of piqued my interest. And the first one is off the original release, and that's Coal Tattoo.
mm.
Was actually written by Billy Ed Wheeler. And the thing with Coal Tattoo is that when you listen to the recording, it's very echoey and very almost like
Yes.
hollow hall kind of thing. But as I'm listening to this, and I have to preface that I am a longtime fan of Krista Berg. So there's a lot
Mhm.
about Jim Croce and his songwriting that kind of, it kind of tickles my musical sensibilities a little bit. But there's something about Cold Tattoo that also reminds me a little bit of Downeaster Alexa by Billy Joel, another fantastic songwriter, of course,
Yep.
in that it's just, you can almost visualize the story of just someone who works in the coal mines.
Yeah.
Downeaster Alexa, you're talking about people who, work the fishing and like they're phenomenal songs.
Mhm.
But then on the reissue, and I'm glad you mentioned Ingrid Croce's voice because the two of them sound so good together, and her voice is so good on
It
those
is.
recordings. And Hard Times Be Over not only is a fantastic song, but there's some great lyrics in there. And I remember as I was listening to it, they have the line of picket lines and bread lines and buddy, do you have a dime? Even cornered drucks are getting sober. I'm like, this is brilliant,
Yeah.
just lyrical play. And I think I'm actually going to go with Hard Times Be Over. I had Cool Tattoo in my list. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to call the audible and I'm
Yep.
going to go with Hard Times Be Over because really, had that song not been, you know, on any other album or had it been on any other album, I probably would have picked it there. So I'm going to take advantage of the reissue. It's not
Yep.
cheating when it's your
Nope.
show and you make the rules yourself. So I actually get to go with the reissue, but that's not to take anything away from Cold Tattoo. If the reissue didn't exist, Cold Tattoo would have been my pick. But no, I'm going to go with Hard Times Be Over.
Yeah, and I think you spoke on something that's very powerful too in this collection of songs by Jim Croce, where he's referencing oftentimes whether it be the train, the railroad, all working on the railroad, mines, working in the mines, like all of these things that just like in music could be so powerful. We already know that, so you could
Mhm.
just get taken back to that sort of time frame, that frame of mind of working in the mines. My grandfather worked in the mines, like those are things that like just you have a connection to it even if you don't think you do, and then listening to this music all it just ties it all back.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing too. When it comes to folk music and folk rock, as Jim Croce eventually leans into in some of
Mhm.
his later albums, there are always fascinating stories. And writers looking to create movies and movie scripts and whatnot, you know, could do much worse in looking at the lyrics of folk songs and finding inspiration in there because there are some fascinating stories written in these songs. We now move on to Jim and Ingrid Croce, released September 1969. The album and the songs on it were actually recorded as a demo in order for them to audition for a children's show in Boston. They didn't get the children's show, but lo and behold, we got this album. And it's the only full album that features both Jim and Ingrid and a lot of their harmonies that they have been putting together. So, off of this one, what did you go with?
Yeah, I mean, you just touched on it there. The harmonies on this album, like I don't want to breeze past that because like we got a taste of it on that reissue from in Facets, but obviously it was, released later in 2004, but it is just phenomenal, this album, in terms of the harmonies. Like I think some of the best I think the best of Jim Croce's entire discography, if we're going to be completely honest about it. I think later on there's definitely some great backing vocals, but this is just harmonies, just beautiful. I went with Age. It's one that I'd listened to off of it was later released on I Got a Name. And then so I listened to it on that one, but then I came back obviously It's on Jim and Ingrid. And I picked that one because I think just the line, I've traded love for pennies and sold my soul for less. Like, just that's a great line. That is just a fantastic line. There's some other good tunes on here. Spin, spin, spin. Piano. It adds a lot to it. I really like that tune. What the hell? If you should call from time to time, don't be surprised if the voice that answers ain't mine. Like, I like that line a lot. Like, that's just a really cool tune. Key change at the end of it as well, which really I thought was a nice touch there. But yeah, I went with Age. It's the song that I knew off of this album before I listened to it, and it's the one that I ended up going with.
And interestingly, when you take a listen to the whole album, Age is the one song that doesn't really feature a lot of Ingrid harmonizing with Jim. The majority of the songs on this, they're trading off lead vocals, the choruses, they're pretty much together all the time. Age is the one where it feels like Jim is really out front, and you can hear Ingrid a little bit in the back as more of a subtle backup vocal.
Yeah.
But it's also my pick as well. And when I heard it on, I got a name. I'm like, well, if I didn't pick it then, I probably would have picked it, later. But it really is. And to lead off the album. Now, I recognize that the album was re-released later on as Jim and Ingrid Croce, Another Day, Another Town. And Age is actually the fourth song on that release, with Another Day, Another Town being the lead-off track. So they did change up the track order. I think Age is a fantastic way to start the album.
Yeah.
But to the same token as well, I also appreciate when an artist, or a label in this case, doesn't want to put their best song right out on Front Street.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you do also, in the composition of an album, like, you want to build to something, right? Like, you want to have that, I think, your best song, maybe like third, where it's like you get the chance, you get a solid opener in there, you get to the third song, maybe the second one takes a step back. The third one is the one that you really want to pop. But I do like it when a band just comes out swinging. I mean, and we talked about that on the Sloan episode with Action Packed. It comes right out with Gimme That. And it's like, okay, well, we're going. Like, this is what this album is. We're absolutely going to crush it. So Age is that song that I really think sets the tone for what the album is. And I mean, obviously we don't get much of a flavor of Ingrid in that song, but the ones that come later, I mean, she's basically like The Next Man That I Marry. Like, that's all Ingrid. Like,
yeah.
And the fiddle in that one is fantastic as well. That's the thing about these traditional folk, like we brought up in previous episodes, the strings that really pop. I mean, this is where like you get so much time for strings to just like really shine, and they do on this album.
Oh, absolutely. And I can also appreciate too, with the reorder, because the album is very much a Jim and Ingrid album. Mm-hmm. She is as much a part of this album as Jim is himself. So yes. I can see why they would want to put Age maybe in the middle of the pack, and focus on the harmonies off the front. Then you get Age, and then you continue with the harmonies, rather than going Age and then everything else feels different than the opening track. I mean, there's always an art and a science to track order on an album, and I can only imagine some of the decisions, and they probably have it all up on a chalkboard or whatnot. It's like, okay, how do we do this, and how do we do this, and where do we put this song? There's a flow to it. It's kind of like making a set list at that point.
It's like the Always Sunny in Philadelphia episode where Charlie has all the things like on the wall, and he's got like the pinpoints, and he's like a big conspiracy kind of thing. Like it's kind of, I feel like it's kind of like that. I've never been in the process of putting an album together, but I feel like there's a lot of like loose ends and lots of line and stuff tied up. And yeah, anyways, that's a bit of a non sequitur from me.
Well, and that's like having put out an album, especially on cassette, you have to sit there and say, okay, well, how long is this side? How long is this side?
Yeah.
Do things flow well together? Like, it's fascinating. And then too, when you're putting a set list together, not only are you thinking, well, how do these songs flow together? Are they in the proper key? Can we transition to them? Like, there is a science to the order of songs. And here, with two different releases and two different track orders, you can sit there and argue one or the other. Both are still right, depending on what you're looking for. You Don't Mess Around with Jim. The album, not just a blanket statement, released in April 1972. The album hit number 1 in US and Canada. It is gold in the US, and there were 3 singles off of this one. Time in a Bottle hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. And if you think Well, that sounds somewhat familiar. Then clearly you've watched X-Men Days of Future Past and remember the Quicksilver slow-mo scene as they're trying to break out Magneto, which that was one of the coolest scenes from the X-Men franchise, period. But off of this album, what did you go with?
This one was a tough one. This one is it's just such a great album. I mean, I have it on vinyl. I picked it up at a record store not long ago and I felt so good about myself cuz I was like, dude, that's a great find. In the used section as well. Got it for a great deal. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. I went with Operator. Um there's a lot of songs on here that I would love to go in depth. New York's Not My Home has a great opening riff. It's a very powerful, like missing a small town. I'm from Newfoundland. Like I say, I live in Toronto. So that one really like it really sort of is my sensibilities a lot, like where it's like I miss, small town Newfoundland. New York's not his home. That's a really powerful tune. Walking Back to George is a great tune, but Operator, my God, Operator. It's virtuosity on the guitar for sure. Maury Mulison, as I pointed out earlier, was a partner of Jim Croce. If you watch the live versions of this song and you just see him all over the neck of the guitar, just going ham, like absolutely insane. Like I cannot even fathom like the fact that your fingers could move that fast, as fast as they do with him. It's great vocals. Living in LA with my best old ex-friend Ray. Like there's just a lot of pain in that lyric. A guy she said she knew well and sometimes hated. Oh man, like it's just a fantastic song. It tells a story in a very succinct way and one that I think that we can all sort of on some level that we can relate to. And then the chorus, isn't that the way they say it goes? Let's forget all that and give me the number if you can find it. Talking to like this one-sided conversation with an operator, like it's just kind of that it's just such an interesting way for a song to come together and for a story to be told, and we're only getting one side of it. Like we know the information, we know that this guy is talking about a girl that he was involved with that moved to LA with his ex old best friend Ray, and that he's dealing with the pain of that, but we don't know any other information. We don't know what's her story. So like it's a really interesting song in that way. It tells a really cool story. And obviously Operator being, something from, 1970s before my time, but like the fact that, like it's touching on that part of it too. Like when you make a long distance call at that point, you have to talk to the operator. He has to connect you. Like it's all, and later on we get even another line that just kind of piques my interest as well. But anyways, this song is just so good. But yeah, that's my pick off of this album. Photographs and Memories is really nice and sentimental, but I went with Operator. It's a great tune just all around.
I really agree with your mention of New York's Not My Home. It is
Mm.
fantastic. And this is where the strings really come into play as well.
Yes.
I was grooving a little bit to You Don't Mess Around with Jim, the lead off track off of the album. I had fun with Rapid Roy, the Stock Car Boy. It's a good song. It's a fun one, but it's hard to dismiss Time in a Bottle. And it's not just because of the X-Men. Okay, so let me explain. I had mentioned earlier on when we were talking about facets that I am a long time Chris de Burgh fan, and I have seen him far more times live than I can count because I'm not that smart. But there's an album that he put out early on in his career called Far Beyond These Castle Walls. And on that album, there was a song called Satin Green Shutters. And it very much like, not as much as Cold Tattoo, because Cold Tattoo had a lot of echo and, that big hall feel. Satin Green Shutters also has that very empty room kind of recording sound to it. And it's very, very haunting. And when you listen to Time in a Bottle, the fact that Croce's voice is it's a little bit lighter. I don't want to say it's falsetto, but it's definitely dialed back a little bit. But it's also the minor progressions in the main verses. And I'm like, this is not a blues riff. This is not a traditional folk riff. This is really light, and just that minor progression gives it you're not sure whether it's a sad or an ethereal type tune, but Time in a Bottle really does stand the test of time. The fact that they went back to it and they keep bringing it back into different movies and TV shows, it's a fantastic song.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, it's kind of that one. It's the song off of this record that I really didn't appreciate until I listened to it on vinyl, and I was just like, okay, yeah, like I can see this now. I get this because yeah, it's just that yeah, that minor progression you touched on, it gives it like this kind of a haunting feel, but then you go into the chorus and it kind of like it says like it makes me feel warm. I don't know what it is about it. I can't really verbalize it. Like it's just this thing, like the chorus is just this, there's this warmth that I get from the chorus. I have to be honest. I don't really know how to say it better than that.
Yeah. You actually pretty much have a mood duality with this
Yeah.
song. And that is literally in the changing from the minor progressions to almost like a major key during the chorus.
Mhm.
And for a song to be able to do that and yet not really change the softness of his voice in either, it's just a matter of like if you change the key, you change the feel. And that is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is just Jim Croce's voice. Like his vocals on this album throughout, just unbelievable.
Oh, absolutely. Life and Times, released January of 1973. The album hit number 7 in the US and number 1 in Canada and is gold in the US. There were 3 singles off of this one. Bad Bad Leroy Brown hit number 1. And let me tell you why it is my pick off of this album. I did have These Dreams on my short list for this, which is a fantastic song. But whenever you play a song live, as I have with Bad Bad Leroy Brown, it's you feel almost extra connected to it, especially when the song is one of those ones where people know it and they start toe tapping and they start singing along, and then it becomes more than just you're a musician playing a song. The room becomes the instrument, and you feel like the vibe is felt all around. This happens on a number of times when we play certain songs. Like anytime we do Have You Ever Seen the Rain from CCR?
Mm.
That's another one where the crowd knows it, they sing along, it feels great, right? Bad Bad Leroy Brown, and it was a great show to play. It was just myself and a guitarist doing an acoustic show playing this song, and it was so much fun. And the thing is, it's not a hard song to play, which means you can have a lot of fun and go different places with it. Bad Bad Leroy Brown it's a party waiting to happen no matter where you play it. But what did you go with?
So I wanted just to point out in my notes, for Bad Bad Leroy Brown, I have wrote, I mean, come on. Easy sing along tune. Everyone loves it. You hear it at bars, you hear it, yeah, like with live gigs, live music. It's just fantastic every time. It doesn't miss. Not my pick though. That's an honorable mention for sure because obviously, One Less Set of Footsteps, also an honorable mention. It's a great tune. The guitar is great, easy hook to groove to. Like it's just kind of really, it's a fun tune. I really like it. The line, your silver tongue has turned to clay and your golden rule to rust. I love that. That's a great tune. That's a great line, rather. I went with Careful Man, which was kind of a surprise to me because I kind of figured going into this one, I was going to go with One Less Set of Footsteps. But Careful Man, it's got an awesome groove. The fiddle on it, again, the strings, like it's just the piano. And then the opening line, I don't gamble, I don't fight, I don't be hanging in the bars at night. Like I love it. Like it's just a really cool tune, one that I'm gonna have to go back and listen to over and over again, just because it's not one that I listened to when I really got into Jim Croce in the beginning of the year. It's one that just really popped off of this record for me when I was listening to it the other day, and I was just like, okay, well, I think that's actually gonna be my pick. I think I'm gonna go off the board a little bit with one that I really thought was just gonna be One Less Set of Footsteps, and we're done, and we're off to the next one. But Careful Man is a tune that really grabbed me the other day, rather.
And that's the thing. A lot of these albums that we discuss on this show, not necessarily this episode, but in past episodes, you grab the album or you pop it on Spotify or iTunes or however you're listening to it, and you go through the track listing. You're like, okay, it's probably going to be this song, but I'm still going to do my due diligence and listen to the album. And then every now and then, especially when you're not as familiar with the full album, because I'll admit there are episodes where I've done where I know the hits and that's about it. And with Jim Croce, I knew the hits. Like I knew Time in a Bottle. I knew Bad Bad Leroy Brown. I played Bad Bad Leroy Brown. There are songs that you're familiar with, but it's always those deep cuts that all of a sudden, like, oh, I forgot about or I didn't know this existed, right? Like,
Yeah.
and every now the single isn't always the best song on the album, and I've lost the number of times where it's like, yeah, I thought it was going to be this, it ended up being this. This should have been a single, and I recognize that in the 60s and the 70s, you only had like two, maybe
Yeah.
three singles if you were lucky off of an album, because you were putting out albums fairly frequently back then.
Well, and Jason, this is where I have to give you a debt of gratitude, because in the 2 previous episodes, I discovered songs that have now become my favorites of the catalogs of Sloan and Paramore. So it's happened again with Jim Croce. So this is where I need to extend my sincere thanks for this podcast, for the premise of this podcast, and having me on to talk about these things.
Oh, you're here for a while, dude. Yeah, there can be many, many, many more episodes with you on. But we now hit the end of our journey with I Got a Name, released December 1st, 1973. This is the one and only posthumous release, because prior to this was the plane crash that took Jim Croce's life. The album hit number 2 in the US and Canada and number 69 in Australia, and is gold in the US. There were 3 singles off of this one. I'll Have to Say I Love You in a Song hit number 1 on the adult contemporary charts. And before we get to our picks, I need to point out that listed as additional musicians on here was Leroy Brown.
I saw that. That's pretty crazy.
Right? But the other thing too is that on synthesizer and oboe is the one and only late great Michael Kamen. And if you are into movie scores and some of the work that he did with bands like Queensryche and Metallica, Michael Kamen was one of the best when it came to adding strings to rock music. And the reason why I like certain bands, a lot of it can be pointed directly to Michael Kamen, and it is fantastic to see him on this album. So it's a who's who of, who's good on the track listings on this. So off of this album, what did you go with?
Yeah, so this one was, man, this is a tough one, because there's a lot of good tunes on this record. I have to be honest. I mean, I am probably most familiar with this album in terms of the songs that I was really listening to when I really got into Jim Croce. A lot of them were from this album. I mean, Lover's Cross is a really good tune. I Got a Name, obviously. Like, I have a whole paragraph of lyrics here. Like, it's just such a great tune. Like, the tempo change, it moving me down the highway the first time it hits, like, and then they can change their minds, but they can't change me later in the song. Like, that's just, oh dude, Jim Croce again. Like, it's one of those things where you just have to think about like how many other great lyrics and great songs were we robbed of. It's just such a tragedy. But I ended up going with I'll Have to Say I Love You in a Song. It's the one that I probably listened to the most off of this one. Again, the strings are just fantastic on this song. And the line, every time I tried to tell you the words just came out wrong, so I have to say I love you in a song. Like, that's just, I think that's like basically the nuts and bolts of every love song that exists. But to actually say it that way, have it laid out like that, I really like that. That's a really nice sincerity, really nice vulnerability from Jim Croce. But again, we get the, age is on here again. I mean, there's just, okay. So here's what I'm going to say, Jason, because I feel like if I know you, like I think I know you, I think the song that I had as an honorable mention is maybe your pick or was on your short list.
I'm curious now.
Which is 5 Short Minutes.
Oh my God, you freaking know me.
But I was just like, that's got some tough subject matter in there.
Oh, absolutely. And it is actually my pick off this album. Okay. Am I that transparent?
You know what? I heard it and I was like, Jason's going to like this.
Oh, absolutely.
This is a Jason song.
Yeah. And the thing is, this is probably the most rocking song that Jim Croce put out over those 5 albums. And as I'm listening to this, I'm like, this is a banger. And I know no one in the history of ever will ever say, oh, that Jim Croce song's a straight banger. But I just did. I just did. I mean, I Got a Name right off the bat, I was like, okay,
Mhm.
I may not have to listen to the rest of this album because it's such a
Yeah.
good song, right? Lover's Cross is also very good. Thursday, I actually really enjoyed. Top Hat Bar and Grill was kind of fun, you know?
It's a fun tune, it really is. I mean, near the end of this album, I mean, I also really liked, Recently.
Mm-hmm.
Recently is a really nice closer to this one as well. Salon and Saloon, by the way, was a song that was written by Maury Mulinson, and it was kind of like a tip of the cap to him by Jim Croce that it was included. It was the last song that Jim Croce ever recorded. So that's another little tidbit there, but I'll let you continue. Sorry.
But yeah, but every now and then when a song comes on, and sometimes it's a little bit out of their wheelhouse, but it works.
Mhm.
There was, I remember when I did the ACDC episode, and there were a few albums in that one. But when we got to the song Two's Up, and I'm listening to this, I'm like, this feels like they wrote in a minor key, like they learned a new chord. And
Yeah.
not to diss on ACDC a little bit, but
Uh,
it felt different. And then all of a sudden it perks your ears up, because I will admit there are times when I binge a few albums in a day just in order to try, because some of these episodes that we've done, there's a few albums that go through. This one wasn't so bad. You do an album in the car on the way to work, you
yes.
do an album in the car on the way back from work, and you're pretty much covered in a couple of days. 5 short minutes. And at this point, I think it was actually the second album of Croce's that I was listening to on the day that I was doing my research. And you're driving along. Okay, cool. I got a name. 5 short minutes comes on. I was like, what is this? And you stop and you start looking at the screen, realize you're driving, you look back at the road, make sure you're not going to crash into anybody, but you make note. And it's one of those things where I made a mental note. Like, when I get home and I'm safe off the road, I'm going
Yeah.
to add this to my liked songs, because there are songs that all of a sudden you put them on, and this is not one of the singles.
Mhm.
The three singles that were put, and I will list all the songs, so this includes the B-sides, because remember, we're talking vinyl days. I Got a Name with the B-side of Alabama Rain. I'll have to
Mhm.
say I Love You in a Song with the B-side of Salon and Saloon, and Working at the Car Wash Blues with the B-side of Thursday. So 5 short minutes was never released as a single or a B-side to the vinyl, to the 45. It was just on this album. And I have a feeling it's one of those songs that probably goes overlooked quite a bit,
Yep.
because it's not what you necessarily expect when you hear Jim Croce.
Yeah, and I think for me too, the saxophone. Like I played saxophone in school band. I played alto and tenor. So as soon as there's any saxophone solo, my ears perk up. So the saxophone underneath in this song, just fantastic. I mean, the first thing I wrote was "damn" in capital letters. It was like, this is like, the meme, the inside the NBA Shaq. I have to apologize. I wasn't familiar with your game. This is Jim Croce's. I'm sorry, I have to apologize. I wasn't familiar with your game. I didn't know you had that. 5 short minutes. I did not know Jim Croce had anything resembling this song in his catalog. Then I listened to it. I was like, wow. And especially coming off of Lover's Cross, too. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
heard that, like you said, you listen to the album. Okay, you go, I Got a Name. You got Lover's Cross. Really nice, soft, beautiful Jim Croce. Vocals, fantastic. Guitar, strings, all of it. Then you get to this one. Holy cow. Like just completely, just a rocker, start to finish, a rocker with some tough subject matter, I
Yeah.
will say.
And to give you an idea of just how good slash bad this song is, bad, BAAD, this is the song that Leroy Brown did backing vocals on this album.
Mm,
So bad Leroy Brown made this song bad. But
yep.
now we get to the hard part. Now, it's not a big, long album run, but
Mm-mm.
there's still some tough choices to make. So, Joe, do me a favor. Remind our listeners the 5 songs that made your list. And then, if there can only be one Jim Croce song from the songs that you have picked, what's it going to be?
So off of Facets, I went with Texas Rodeo. Off of Jim and Ingrid, I went with Age. Off of You Don't Mess Around with Jim, I went with Operator. Life and Times, I went with Careful Man. And I Got a Name, I went with I'll Have to Say I Love You in a Song. So I did what I could, Jason, to keep my cards close to the vest here, because the one thing I didn't want to do was sort of analyze the song that I ended up going with and sort of tipping my hand as to what my favorite song is. It's Operator off of You Don't Mess Around with Jim. It's the one that I heard at the restaurant, and it's the one that got me into Jim Croce. And but the thing was, I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to give away the reason why it's my favorite song in the initial explanation. I'm going to save that for right now. And I got into the vocals. I got into the guitar playing. Maury Mulison was fantastic. The chorus, isn't that the way they say it goes? Let's forget all that. Give me the number if you can find it. So I can call just to tell her I'm fine, like just and to show I've overcome the blow. Like we all want to do that. We all want to let the person know that's wrong to say, hey, I'm okay. It's all good. Don't worry about it. The last verse in this song, before the final chorus, there is a line. And it's not the line itself, I've discovered, because I was trying and racking my brain to be like, okay, why is this my favorite song? Because Jason, the exercise of this podcast has really it's challenged me a lot because it's like, I know the songs that I like. Why do I like them? And that's been a really I've had to really wrap my brain around this for a lot of songs that I've just liked for many years. And I just can't really rationalize or explain it. This was one where it boils down to one line, and not even the line itself, but the delivery of the line. You can keep the dime. There is so much said in Jim Croce saying, thank you for your time. You've been so much more than kind. You can keep the dime. There is so much it's a pained concession of know what? No, I'm not going to do this. Thank you. It's all good. You can keep the dime. And just the pausing as well. This song is powerful in its words, but then it also when he doesn't say anything. When there's gaps and there's silence. It's just him just kind of going through it. There's a line earlier in the song. There's something in my eye. This happens all the time. And he's talking about he's crying. You can't read the matchbook because he's crying. It's such a powerful and vulnerable song. And it's this particular line, you can keep the dime, that I just had to keep coming back to. And I think that there's honestly there are probably actors that could probably learn how to play a part of just this pained and just downtrodden guy in this position from just the way that he delivers that line. You can keep the dime. I just keep coming back to it over and over again. Anyways, Operator is my favorite Jim Croce song. It's the one that I always listen to. I listen to it almost not every day, but it's on the playlist. It's on, on Spotify with the on repeat. It's in there perennially. It's just there. I just always can count on it. It's there to play when I want to listen to it. And yeah, it is my favorite of his catalog. So that's my pick, Jason.
All right. And then for me, off of 1966 Facets, I called the audible and went with Hard Times Be Over. From Jim and Ingrid Croce, I went with Age. From You Don't Mess Around with Jim, I went with Time in a Bottle. Off of Life and Times, I went with Bad, Leroy Brown, baddest man in the whole downtown. And from I Got a Name, I went with 5 Short Minutes. But if I had to choose, and I must because I made the show and the rules, I'm going to go with Time in a Bottle. Now, I will admit, I've never had a chance to play this song, but I love when musically a song hits. And for me, it is that minor progression. But the story behind this song is fascinating because Jim Croce wrote the lyrics for this song after finding out that Ingrid was pregnant. So this is, when you go back and you read the lyrics, this is a really freaking sweet song. But the funny thing is, we talked about the duality with this, is that there are lines in this where, depending on the mood that you're in or how you're feeling, it's like some of them are a gut punch, right? You sit there and go, oh, dear God. For example, the lines, but there never seems to be enough time to do the things you want to do once you find them. And if you're of a certain age, that song could really hit a little bit harder. It's like when we did the Pink Floyd episode and we got to the song Time and you sit there and you read the lyrics and go, oh dear God, I need to go out and do things.
Yeah.
But it really is a sweet song. I mean, you take the verse, if I had a box just for wishes and dreams that had never come true, the box would be empty except for the memory of how they were answered by you. This is a sweet song with a deceptive chord progression that makes it sound not as sweet as the lyrics actually are. So it's really quite fascinating to dissect the duality of this song, but it fits exactly into the kind of song that I would pick from Jim Croce. So for me, it is Time in a Bottle. Joseph, thank you so much for doing this show. Now, please let our listeners out there know where they can find you out there on the interwebs.
On the interwebs, you can find me on Instagram at JosephWhalen17, and then on X, as the kids are calling it, you can find me at Joe Whalen 19, just because I like the numbers 19 and 17, but not enough to include them in one username. Yeah, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I was about to say, if there can only be one number, which one would it be?
It'd probably be 17.
All right. You know you're going to have to come back on. So make sure you start thinking about who we're going to cover next the next time you're on. And dear listeners, you guys know the drill. If there is an artist out there that you want us to cover on There Can Only Be One, or an album that you want us to cover on Spin Shuffle Skip, hit us up on social media at OnlyOneCast, or go to our website at notthatbadcast.com. And while you're there, make sure you check out our Coming Soon page so you can see some of the episodes that we are planning on working on. Until next time, he's Joseph, I'm Jay. You guys are awesome. This is There Can Only Be One, a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Take care.
The Kimi Kato Show, featured on Pantheon Podcasts.
The Kimi Kato Show is a weekly exploration of Japanese pop culture in all its facets. Kimi and Jeremiah, as hosts, delve into various aspects of Japanese culture, including music, food, fashion, and film, offering listeners a comprehensive and entertaining look at what makes Japanese pop culture unique and intriguing. It is your invitation to Japan.
Hey everybody, I'm Dan.
I'm Doug. We're in the band Hoobastank.
Hi, I'm Takato Miyake, working for Suntory Global Spirits.
Hello, I'm Sincere from Busenke.
Hello guys, this is Masata Kumi.
This is Chris Hart.
Hi, I am Sugizo. You are listening to Kimi Kato Show. Thank you.
Kimi Kato Show is brought to you by Evolve Entertainment Network, Pantheon Podcasts, and Radio Candy Media.